Hi, welcome to Morning Talk Show. Today is my conversation with Esther Lightcap Meek. Esther is a philosopher and a teacher of philosophy. She is professor emeritus of philosophy at Geneva College, and she holds a view of epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge, which kind of stems from the work of Michael Polanyi, and has been kind of alternately controversial and kind of ignored, but it seems extremely true to me. Esther is such a warm and accessible person and has devoted her life to kind of communicating this view of epistemology, which is very real and also very, like, as much as this sounds like a negative in the modernist way of thinking, it's a very encouraging way to look at knowledge. So in this conversation, she encourages me to read her book, A Little Manual for Knowing, which I have done since, and it is wonderful. So we don't actually get to talk about that book, but I would recommend it, so I'm putting that in the intro. So anyway, without further ado, if you're interested in knowledge and what knowledge might be, and a view of knowledge that seems very human, then please watch this interview with Esther Lightcap Meek. Thank you. Esther Meek, welcome to Morning Talk Show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad to meet you and start to have a conversation with people that listen to you. Lovely.
That would be great. And I can say from my YouTube comments, this is on YouTube and audio, the people who regularly listen are a really interesting and really nice group of people. You hear about YouTube comments being this terrible cesspool, and I have had the opposite experience. I've literally had strangers wanting to discuss issues further and just wanting to drop a note saying they appreciated things. So anyway.
Well, that kind of goes with what you just told me before we started recording, which is your philosophy of conversation, and that it's kind of transformative. And so your readers apparently get that and feel like they're caught up in it, and that's lovely.
I think they do. Yeah. So what I do at the beginning of every episode is I'm going to try to keep it brief because I really do get going sometimes. But I just briefly say why I wanted to have you, and then we can just be totally free form from then on. And so you're someone that I've known about for a very long time. Or very long, you predate the podcast for me. And so during a certain period of my life when I was very full of angst about a few things, mostly related to my Christian faith, I reached out to you because I was pretty sure that I was on the way to atheism. I wasn't there, mostly because I just didn't have a desire to be an atheist. But I felt like that was the only thing keeping me from it. Like functionally, I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And I was looking for, thinkers and that to help me. And the idea of epistemology came up, and I put epistemology into YouTube because I was at work and I just wanted to listen to something. And you came up. And
that's scary.
Yeah, well, I mean,
That's so cool, though. I'm actually very honored that YouTube connects me with epistemology.
Yeah, because I didn't write Christian epistemology, and to be honest, I was a little bit frustrated at how Christian you were at the time, because you start. No, it's good. It's very good. But you just, you know how you start a journey and you start to create a sense of narrative to what you're doing. And the narrative was clearly for me that I have been failed by this religion and this system and this faith and this God. And please help me find my next path. Please, universe, help me find my next step. Yeah. And so
did you write me?
I did. Yeah, I wrote you right away. Very angsty too. And
I hope I replied. I
Oh,
would feel
yes.
terrible if I didn't reply.
No, you did. Yeah, you replied and said, "Thank you for sharing so honestly of yourself," or something like that. I remember it better than a lot of things from that period of my life. And um, so the thing was for me that you the way that you expressed what epistemology even is, what knowing is, was different than I'd ever heard, and made sense of reality in a way that, I mean, I just expected someone to explain to me what the general mainline consensus on epistemology is. I got the opposite of that, because I would say it's probably not the mainline by any stretch. And ever since then,
It is what you're doing when you know.
Right. Yes. But I, but since then, I have kind of been looking for other people to have a different view of epistemology other than the sort of rather two-dimensional one. I've even heard people describe the scientific method as epistemology, which and very kind of condescendingly. So my first thing to do, now that people have gotten through all this personal biography of me, who probably aren't interested in that, is for you to describe. I'm sure you have a bit of an elevator pitch of what epistemology is, that you do all the time. So yeah.
Okay, I'll try. I do have to interject what Parker Palmer said in a book I just read of his on an array of things, including aging. But he said somebody asked him for an elevator pitch, and he said, "I don't have one. I take the stairs. If you'd like to walk along with me, I'll talk with you."
I like that.
Well, I would say epistemology has to do with all our questions about how knowing happens. And in philosophy, you get to study those big questions, but whether you study them or not, you have them. So you are living out some sort of supposition about how you know, and some sort of supposition about what reality is, and then about what is right and good, and what it means to be human. Those are the big areas of philosophy. And so epistemology is not actually the study of anger management, as some 18-year-old said to me, but it's episteme has to do with knowing. So it's a study of knowing. And it's a little weird to talk about knowing as an item as opposed to the what's that you know. But those were my 13-year-old questions. I had a crisis as a child that was really an epistemic existential crisis, and that's what really got me going on this. At first I thought it was sin. I didn't tell anybody, and then later I learned that it was philosophy, and that responses to my questions had shaped whole cultural epochs across the disciplines, which fired my imagination for the interdisciplinary. And then it took me a few years more to figure out that you could actually study philosophy in college. And once I figured that out, it took me 12 hours to change my course of life to do that.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked back. So did that, your question was, what is epistemology? So I'd say it's about knowing. It's about how knowing works. One way you can say it is, how is it that we know anything at all? That's one way to ask it. Another way is to say, do we know anything at all? And I have to go on to say, in our modern era, we have put skepticism on the top side of the ball that we're balancing. And so we tend to be all shaped as skeptics. And that's due to our modernist milieu, which I think is a problem. And it's not the way it should be. And if you get back to, I had mentioned to you earlier, I've been talking about a metaphysics of childhood. Those things in our very, very earliest hours that we come to rest in, trust of the other that we encounter, and delight in the things around us, is what is the orientation that is natural to us. So skepticism is not a part of that. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I like that you put in children at the very end there, because it's so great. I have a 10-month-old baby that you didn't see earlier, and so I've gone through this 3 times now, and it is, yeah, you're right. It's not, skepticism is definitely a bolt-on um, thing, and it's good. It's not bad. I would say I mean, correct me, you may feel that all skepticism is bad. I feel that, I have a pretty strong stream of skepticism within myself that I'm lucky enough that it just runs across everything instead of being only towards certain people, so that I'm skeptical of myself, and then can move into some kind of self-forgiveness, skeptical of others. But yes, yeah, interesting. I like that. um, what what was so encouraging to me was your definition of what knowing is, or what our knowledge is constituted of.
mhm.
And my read on that is that knowledge does actually is created through patterns that in reality, subsidiaries that that lead to that create a primary focus when we kind of interact with them correctly. I'm not going to say it perfectly, but that was what got me. Do you have? I guess, yeah. Correct the way that I just said that.
Oh, well, thank you. Let me try. So picking up on something I learned from the philosopher Michael Polanyi, all knowing has a from to subsidiary focal integrative structure, which means it's like there's two levels of awareness. You're attending from something to and attending to something. And that takes the form of an integrative pattern. Best examples to start with are skills. So if you pick a skill that you're really good at, like driving or bike riding or volleyball, or I mean, it applies to any sport or anything. But let's talk about bike riding. Another great one is reading. And you can remember back to the point A before you got going on the skill, and you were looking at things that didn't add up. You look, if I were to try to read Chinese right now, and I would look at the beautiful characters, I would be looking at them, right? To learn to read is to learn to look from them to a farther pattern. And it's at that point that you say, oh, I'm reading and this makes sense, da, 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 da. So in other words, in your struggle to make sense of things, there comes to be a shift, so that what you used to be looking at, you are now able to look from, to integrate to a farther pattern that does not in any way reduce to the things that you have come to indwell as clues to it. So from and to, the integrative pattern is irreducible to the clues. That means that knowing cannot be linear. There's got to be some kind of a logical leap. And then in light of the integrative pattern, which happens in a moment of insight or over a time of slow growing into wisdom, it's from the point of view of that pattern that you can look back and make sense of things that didn't make sense at the time. Great biblical example is the disciples on the road to Emmaus,
Mm-hmm.
and their incredible frustration on the way, as this crazy young rabbi shows up and doesn't seem to know what's happened in Jerusalem over the weekend and why this is a problem and all of that, and then kind of calls them on the carpet about not understanding the scriptures. I mean, it's like, what is going on here? But when their eyes are open to the breaking of the bread, what they say later is, did not our hearts burn within us when he talked with us on the way? So there was something anticipative in their frustration something, their body was kind of out in front of them as far as putting it together. But it's when you have that aha of insight and your eyes are opened and you have leapt to the integrative pattern, that then that makes sense of everything that you were struggling to indwell subsidiarily. Let me just say something about that word subsidiary. So the subsidiary level or subsidiary awareness, I tend to call it just the subsidiary, because it can be stuff you're not aware of, but the point is that it's functioning subsidiarily, and it's integrated into this pattern. So if you're able successfully to ride a bike or surf or snowboard or whatever, it's that you are subsidiarily indwelling and relying on, trusting yourself to your body, the board, the pattern, the situation, the normative guides, the words that you've heard. You're subsidiarily indwelling and entrusting yourself to that, to open to the farther pattern and the possibilities beyond. So once you get it about bike riding, the world comes to you in possible bike paths.
Yeah. The bike riding one is one that has really I've taken on board as one of the ways I think of this through your ideas.
Can I just say something else? I'm perhaps anticipating where you're going, but people's problem with knowledge in the modern age is we take knowledge to be focal information that we need to be certain of. Well, if that's what knowledge is, nobody could ride a bike. It cannot be done. It can't be done. If you focus on the bike and collect information, you will not ride a bike. If you're going to be a pro baseball player or a pro football player, you've got to get it about subsidiary focal integration. And then you see, when we look at, the ideal of what we think knowledge is, and we post the scientific method on the board, on the bulletin board, in the front of the room. We that's actually myopic. That's actually blinding us to the real. So for us to be in a position to open out, to grasp the real, we need to have submitted ourselves to something, to start to live life on its terms, to entrust ourselves to the clues that we have to understand. And you can't argue me out of the fact that that's how knowing works. You just can't. You would have to use it to deny it.
Yeah, I would never try. So many things I like there, man. Just almost too many to know where to jump off. But the scientific method is often what is described as the ideal epistemology, and you're right that it's myopic. It is. I mean, the scientific method is a miracle in a lot of ways. But it is an artificial construct. And I that's just my initial thought about it. It's an artificial construct which helps us to collect data, very specific data. But even the scientific method requires this, forming a hypothesis. And I've read you talk about how how could you ever form a hypothesis, without this other way.
I was starting out as a chemistry major, I just thought I can't possibly do the scientific method because I don't have what it takes to formulate tentative hypotheses. And you see, that's the little gap where the action happens. And scientific method two-dimensionalizes and cuts out, it eclipses the very dynamic that Polanyi called the unaccountable element in science, without which no scientist can be a discoverer. So he wrote Personal Knowledge basically to say, look, the scientific method is not it. And if it were, no scientific discovery could ever happen.
Yeah. Well, I just love how, how real these issues were to you. And I feel like it's, you can see how frustration, I mean, in your story and in my story, certain types of frustration that don't go away can lead us to the knowledge that's going to be the most impactful to our lives. And what I appreciate, one of many things I appreciate about your view of epistemology is that the process is part of the knowing, or that's,
it's the whole, I define knowing as the struggle. I'm not saying the joy is in the journey. That's not stuff that I'm trying to say. But what I'm saying is you want to talk about not knowledge as pieces of information, but the act of coming to know. And it actually can be an act of coming to know, even if you don't get all of it right. You can get this scrabbling, subsidiary struggling to make sense of life, which is what we're always trying to do. And we can get a piece of it right, and that can open possibilities, even though maybe we haven't entirely got it right. We can partially get it wrong.
Absolutely.
It being Columbus Day, I know we're not supposed to talk about anymore, but Columbus thought he discovered, it wasn't America, he thought he discovered.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thought it was in India.
He knew he was onto something big.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but right. No, that's okay. The analogy that I like to use about our knowledge is like, I don't want to say that we can't know anything, but I notice with my children that sometimes they'll be wrong for a really clever reason. And you kind of, you want to respect that. And then, but the thought occurs to me, like, in how many ways am I like that? Is my knowledge like that? I'm wrong for a novel reason that's leading me in a good way.
And mistake can be a clue.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that. Yeah. That good mistake. There can be mistakes that really actually are pregnant with the meaning toward which the pattern toward which you're working. I've got to and Longing to Know. So Longing to Know is my first book, and it's a book for people considering Christianity who have questions that have to do with knowing. And what I found was, obviously I had those questions, but what I've found is anybody that's considering Christianity has to wrestle with those things too. And so I don't think the book is out of date, but I do have a chapter in there about mistakes. And I do have a chapter in there about doubt. That one's called, Are You the One Who Was to Come, or should we look for someone else?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and I do recommend the book, especially for people considering Christianity. I kind of wanted to talk to you because I would like to see this idea of epistemology, I've got no issue with it leading people to Christianity, but I think it's a kind of almost primordial, like pre-step for some people. It definitely was for me. I mean, it was a long time after and I'm not crediting entirely your thoughts on epistemology, but it was a long time between discovering that and being even semi-comfortable calling myself a Christian, which some people would say that I'm not one. Some people would say that I am. But the fascinating thing about it is that I wanted to ask a couple of questions. Oh my goodness, my phone is ringing here. No. Sorry, I'm going to put this on airplane mode. That's never happened in an interview before. It's this new computer is linked to my phone. Anyway, so a couple of distinctions that I was wondering if you could explain would be like this type of knowing overlaps for me with the intuition and with faith. So, and that was one of the things that I found so compelling about it was I like when concepts fudge together and are difficult to pry apart. And it made so much sense to me, but I was like, damn it, this is faith. again. This is faith again. Am I back? Am I on the road back to this thing? So how would you make the distinction between knowledge and intuition and or knowledge and faith?
Okay. Well, I probably would mush them all together. I would say all knowing has components, essential components that can get called either one of those. So when I was studying Michael Polanyi, I went on to do my dissertation on his work, but I was trying to justify my Christianity to myself. One of the things that he said that helped me was he defined commitment. And you're too young to remember when commitment was a bad existentialist word. But in any case, he defined commitment as our manner of disposing ourselves towards something. And so in bike language, that's entrusting yourself to that contraption. And which took the word commitment, or I took it to be faith, as and made it very, very concrete. And that's how in Longing to Know, I keep talking about my auto mechanic, and there's faith all over that. So there's all kinds of things in the act of coming to know that we Christians tend to designate as faith. Commitment to trust something that we half understand. Another is the kind of resolve to hang on to something in the darkness. That's another thing. So John the Baptist's story, he has this great, oh, I see it moment, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And then he is imprisoned and facing his death. And that's when he asks, are you the one who was to come, or should we look for someone else? And so the resolve that he indwells, that probably carries him to his death, I would say counts as faith. And if you're, a scientist on the track of a cure for cancer, there's going to be a lot of times when you've got your teeth gritted and you're living out resolve, which just looks like, some of those times of our Christian life. So I found that we Christians had our Christian speak, and Lord knows God could mean anything, faith could mean anything, and so I was trying, and it mattered to me. This was how I was justifying my Christianity to myself. I needed to see that to be a Christian wasn't some goofy, idiotic, unique way of trusting a book to tell you about something that you didn't see. I mean, it looked so ridiculous to me. But what I needed to see was that was actually an ordinary act of knowing. Not to say God is ordinary, but it's got the same components of coming to know as does my knowing my auto mechanic. So that's faith. And then intuition, I would like to say, that's a word that Polanyi used, and Polanyi was a premier scientific discoverer at the beginning of the 20th century. Discovery was his job, and he kind of stepped away from science to save science from their own dumb epistemology and save culture while he was at it. Because he really felt that this bad epistemology was what was destroying his Europe. He was Hungarian and Jewish. But the trick is that he said for us to be a discoverer, which means it's a little elitist, you gotta have some genius, right? And you also have to have a genius that you cultivate, right? Which is this kind of artful skill of guessing. And you can call that intuition. Another thing that you can call intuition, he distinguished between imagination and intuition in the scrabbling that you do toward the pattern that you don't yet see. And so if you've got your eye on the prize, a la Rocky, and it's a half glimmering vision, and you're subsidiarily scrabbling toward it, that subsidiary scrabbling he calls creative imagination. But you always keep your eye on where you're going, and he calls that creative intuition. And you can actually have a sense that you're getting closer to the solution, right? And all that is what he calls intuition. The other thing that I have so loved, I love this from the get-go when I figured this out about what Polanyi was saying about the subsidiary focal integration, is the subsidiaries are not foolproof. You can have mistaken subsidiaries. And I would argue that all the prevailing skewed idea of knowledge that we've inhaled in modern age is subsidiary falsehoods, that we have bodily indwelled, it's like, that's why I talk about epistemological therapy. We've got to, it's our body that needs to get over the Cartesian egocentric predicament. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do.
So intuition would be certainly some kind of trusting yourself to stuff that you half understand, and also trusting yourself to things that you cannot put into words. And that's why Polanyi's account of how knowing actually works in discovery really helps restore us to ourselves and our knowing, because we do that all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird that something that is so consonant with my experience of life and with pretty much probably everyone's experience of life would also sound so heretical, because it's just not what we want to think our knowledge is. So and it's also, knowledge is at such a basic level, such a low level, not in a qualitative way, but such a deep level that it's actually kind of hard to talk about. And this, so this is the second podcast episode I've done about it. And, the other one was, I really enjoyed it, but it was hard to find anybody who wanted to talk about it even. So I guess, it seems to me like the modern epistemology, where people really somehow believe that their personal epistemology by which they, by which they know what's in their refrigerator and how to get to their job, it's like scientific. It's somehow like they haven't eaten science, and it's now in their mind, and it's how their mind works, and it is a fiction that people have, that we actually think in this way. But like, so you must get a lot of resistance. You must, or I shouldn't say you must, I should just ask, do you get a lot of resistance, or do you get people just thinking it's like a fringe way of thinking that doesn't even deserve?
Yeah, if I actually get to talk to you face to face as I am, and I start talking to you about bike riding and making you find subsidiary focal integration in your bike riding, what I end up with is very excited people who feel utterly restored to themselves. So the argument doesn't come from there.
Right.
And I think perhaps you've put your finger on it, that what is more likely to happen is somebody would dismiss this as not being epistemology or something. So Michael Polanyi is not widely known, even though it's incredible. His genius is incredible. And partly is he was a direct threat to the guild about epistemology and philosophy of science. If anybody should be a philosopher of science, it should be Polanyi, but he is not in the approved story at all. And he was taken to be an eccentric.
Right.
Now, I already look like an eccentric, but you get in a room with me and I start chattering at you about football, and you just might find it that you just have to think about, well, how does this happen? Because honestly, if the reigning paradigm of knowledge as information is the case, everybody is discredited. And the football players above all, and the artists. I mean, everything that's worth anything in life, of your artful skills, your blacksmithy, I don't know, your crocheting, whatever it is, it just doesn't count as knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's pretty. And then you think about the poor scientists are not even allowed to accredit the very genius that is, if despite their scientific method, they're relying on, that get them to the discovery.
Yeah.
So it's just a crying shame. But I think and quite here's, when you kind of translate me over into, church and Christianity and stuff, I don't go into pews and talk to people about doubt and certainty. If I go and smile sweetly and worship God, but if somebody did raise the question, I'd say, well, let's talk about bike riding for a while. That's what I'd say. And keeping your balance on a bike is utterly inarticulable.
Right.
Yes, you could write out a physics formula, but that's no help when it comes to figuring out how to do it.
Yeah.
And keeping your balance on a bike is something that is inarticulable, but it's palpable. You can get it wrong and you can train it. That's the subsidiary. To me, that's like the prime example of the subsidiary. And that is not subjective. It's not mystical. It's ordinary. And it's, yes, it's fantastic. But how is our Christianity different from that?
Yeah. In a way, I feel like the way you're describing knowing is fantastic, because we've had this good long time of just not feeling like the right tool for the job. Like, growing up, just feeling like, I don't know. I feel like I am a person whose intuition has been straining at the leash for my whole life. And I was raised in a very conservative environment where there was lots of philosophy. There wasn't lots of philosophy. There was just enough philosophy to dismiss philosophy. And I've come from a culture where I was told once in asking some questions, I was corrected once by a theology professor for using the term intuition because that came from Eastern mysticism. And I mean, it's fine. He wasn't even my professor, and I told him he was being a jerk. I mean, yeah, he really was. But anyway, I don't really know. I don't really know where I'm going with this, except just that I have a desire for this conversation to grow, this way of thinking to grow, and to go beyond the people who are interested in philosophy, because that's one of the things that's a pretty big divide, right? Because we're talking, I mean, we've been talking.
I'm gonna fix that, because
good.
There's one thing you need to be philosophical, and that's to be born.
Yeah.
So philosophy needs to be unleashed to everybody.
Yeah.
That's my gig.
Actually, I just came up with a weird analogy. So let me just go with it for a second. And it's from C.S. Lewis, so it probably will be something that you may be familiar. In the Chronicles of Narnia, when Aslan talks to Lucy. Are you familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia? Aslan talks to Lucy and tells her she's got to go wake everybody up who's sleeping. They've had a terrible day, and get them to follow her, and say that it's because he told them, but they can't see him. Mm-hmm. And that's how it feels. Oh man, even as I say this, I feel like I'm exposing some kind of savior complex that I have. But that's how it feels sometimes, in that I sense that I would like to communicate these ideas to people who don't even want to know them, because I do think I know that I have suffered in my mind. In fact, and this is an unusual, I have to tease it out because I don't want to make it sound like mental illness, because I know people who have suffered mental illness, but my suffering was a decades long cloudiness, in that I was supposed to be certain about certain things, and I was told it does not matter if you believe them yet, they're right. And you need to work yourself to the point where you are girding up this belief that's already there. You're girding a belief that's already there. And I don't think that I'm saying it in a non-religious way, because I think that it probably applies to plenty of people outside of Christianity, outside of religion.
There's something especially weird, sick, modernist, inappropriately modernist about the infection in Protestant Christianity.
Oh, yes, absolutely agree. It's such a strange stew of conflicting thoughts. And on the one hand, there's always plausible deniability. Anytime I would say, I feel I'm hemmed in by this, I would just be told, no, you didn't get it. You didn't understand. Here's a different way to phrase it. And then still the subsidiaries, all of the patterns that were taking shape were, in my mind, were conflicting and creating deep enough intuitions, not that I was right and they were wrong, but that I just felt cloudy. I just felt really cloudy. And when I talked to you first, it was my to hell with it phase. And I felt like I was reaching down into a bag, a black velvet bag where my beliefs were. And all I could do is reach in with my hand. I couldn't see them, and I couldn't put anything into the bag. I couldn't put anything in there, and I would reach down and try and feel the shape of my own beliefs, and I knew what they were supposed to be, but I was like, are they, are they there? And
I knew what I was supposed to believe about God, but what I didn't know was knowing.
Yeah, which is, and this is what I love about this, is that a light bulb moment in knowing. I mean, who knows where it will take you, but it feels like the beginning of a journey, and I really can't underestimate how important it was in the path that I took, that I started to think about things in this way. And obviously, I'm not perfect at it, but I would really like for people to have that moment, and it does feel somehow greatly affirming to who they are, and great swaths of their personality and experience are now redeemed in a weird way. And it is, it does have a very, sorry.
Yourself. You're restored to yourself.
Yeah.
That's I mean, the thing is, when you show up and you want to talk about epistemology, you have to, there's a whole bunch of, I don't know, qualification you have to do. But one thing I've learned to say is, don't be afraid of the word, because what we're actually going to do today, by the end of the day, you're going to be saying, oh, this is what I've been doing all along.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, it should bring you not into some, abstruse, abstract region of cerebral pontification. It's going to restore. You're going to be better at bike riding and your golf game because of this talk.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about your bottom line. So, I have a lifetime of experience trying to get people on board with philosophy. I also want to say to you, in what you're expressing here, Aaron, your desire to do this. What works best for me in helping others takes reading 1,000 pages that I've written in over a 14-week course. Now I can do a talk in an hour like we're doing now, but it can be better if you read the book, and it can be better if you read the book and I show up. And
right.
It's not anything magical about me, except I can blah, 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 and make you and point. What I do is I kind of help people lay the accents differently in their experience so they can pick out the pattern of how knowing actually works. So, I mean, it's a whole lot easier to explain subsidiary focal integration when I'm talking to you than it is to write a chapter or a book about it, you know.
Right.
But I'm just saying, epistemological therapy can take some time. And so, you know, one thing, you know, if you and I were to strategize, you know, it could be that we might devise some book clubs. You know, so we might read, you know, Longing to Know is, I mean, I'm a one-trick pony. If it's my book, it's about knowing in some way or other. And you have to figure out what works for you. But one is a little manual for knowing. One is Longing to Know. Those are, I think, are the best entrees. But Loving to Know, the big fat one, that's maybe the toughest read, but oh my gosh, the riches in there that I've found in other people and been able to present is just unbelievable. I think Little Manual just skims the cream off of that. But I guess what I'm saying is it takes a willingness on the part of your conversant to listen for a long time, to just to get on board with what I'm saying. And I'm too old to be interested in kind of laying out the whole history of epistemology and I'm just, that's not my whatever. You're going to need to go elsewhere for that. But I want to talk to you about how you know, and I want to talk to you about your heart philosophical orientation and how to restore that to affirmation and delight in the world. So,
well, I really appreciate that, and that spirit really comes through. And I think it's probably another offshoot of, you know, the positive side of a religious or a faith-based mindset. In that it's not. I mean, I definitely acknowledge that you have the full academic, you're academically sound. You have the credentials. That's the word I'm looking for. And yet I appreciate that you're doing this on, what you're doing on more of a personal level. Your writing style is much more personal, anecdotal, because it is something that, I mean, it's not served well
right,
but in academia. Someone would have to do a lot of their own work to take it from an academic context, during some kind of audit of all of the various ways that epistemology is done. So that's something I really appreciate. And really it is kind of inherently, in my view, it's inherently spiritual, to discuss the things that are in our black bag of our mind, the things that are beyond our ability to express in words. And, I don't know if I even use the word spiritual correctly, but anytime we're talking about kind of connecting with ourselves and others in a felt way, it seems like there is a certain element of spirituality there. Does that kind of resonate with you, or how would you describe spirituality in all of this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I guess I have a question. Would you connect your use of spirituality with what you said to me before the podcast about conversations being live? And
oh yeah, I think of conversations as extremely spiritual, and in fact, this podcast is like, I probably will never write a book. And I probably, and I have actually a bit of a hard time with reading printed material. So even reading 100 books is very intimidating for me. So this is kind of one way that I try to even model some of this, or even just model the way of model the desire for it. Even I don't know. Yeah, I do think it's all spiritual.
Are you using spiritual to mean something more's going on than the physical items presenting? That there's just more going on? Is that how you're using the word spiritual?
I think it is. I think there is. I think it's I think of it as spiritual because I'm looking at parts of myself that seem to have myself and others that seem to have some of their own autonomy or some of their own will or their own activity within myself. Because
a life of their own, a life of their own.
Exactly. Yeah. This whole the whole period of time when I first discovered your stuff, that was all the beginning of being like realizing that I'm quite an undiscovered country in myself, and then that other people are quite an undiscovered country, and that actually approaching them as an undiscovered country is a transformative thing for them as well. And meaning there are wild places there. There are there are things we don't know, and when you ask someone, I don't know, you can anyway, whatever. I'm going too far into this, but it is spiritual to me when we look
like
at
the word mystery.
Inside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mystery.
Well, let me just tell you what here, this maybe is related to it. When I first read Michael Polanyi, I remember I was the baby skeptic. How do I know
13.
that God exists? And how do I know that you exist outside my mind? I know, presumably, I just presumed I was certain of the ideas in my head, and that therefore they were blocking and my proof of anything else beyond me. So I was a wreck. Well, Polanyi, the discoverer, all smattered through his writings, he would say, you've made contact with reality when you have a sense of the possibility of indeterminate future manifestations, which I call the IFM effect. Indeterminate future manifestations. So it's a sense, it's unspecifiable, you cannot articulate it, but you've got this sense of future prospects. He would talk about an inexhaustive range of future that's how you've made contact with reality. Well, he's the only person in my study anywhere that ever told me how I know I made contact with reality.
Yeah.
That was like water in a desert. And so I have fallen in love with future possibilities, with the sense of the more. And it might be that this resonates with what you were saying about spirituality, that there's a sense that there's a greater reality that's beyond what you have been able to identify, and you feel that it's in play.
Yep. That's very, it's very real to me. And I've heard you say that, quote Polanyi saying that. And it is the most, for me, it's the most confirming and amazing feeling. I see them as kind of shapes almost. I always picture a cloud at the edge of my knowledge, where I sometimes feel that I'm in the flow of something, and it's random. It's actually, I'm sure it's the opposite of random, but it feels like it doesn't happen at a specific time of life. It's not, for me, it's not when I meditate or whatever. It's just a thought will start, and it will call me forward, tree by tree, like it will. It kind of beckons, and there is this sense of these big things out there that I can, and sometimes I can maybe pull one of them into language, and sometimes I can't. But it's such a great feeling, and it's interesting that would be considered contact with the real, because for many people it would be considered literally nothing.
Exactly. Now, if I may go on a little bit farther,
you may.
I believe that's God. And what I want to say is, so what it is your sense of the larger real. Now, what is the real? Okay, here's my street definition of the real. It's reality is God and his stuff. Right? It's all his let there be's, right? So the real is all the stuff and God. And it's all his stuff. I take that from the Bible. And so I think that's the real that I'm pursuing. Right. And I've talked in Loving to Know about our relatedness with the yet to be known needing to be like an interpersonal dance of overture and response. And I've talked about inviting the person like real. Well, now I'm saying the real invites first. It's after you. And it's longing to draw you out into communion. I think what we're meant to be is to be lovers of the real. That includes God and his stuff.
What I like about that definition of God is that it puts God, it makes God less of an object, and you're not saying that God to any kind of absolute certainty. And maybe you personally go beyond that and do say that. I don't know. I get the feeling that you allow there to be some mystery still in
what I would say, let's assume for the sake of argument that you have the Bible memorized. How much do you really know about God?
Right.
I mean, have we got him in a box? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Honestly, all of our ordinary language, not to mention our literary language, not to mention biblical language, is pregnant. It's pregnant with a three-dimensional richness that's always beyond the words themselves. Our words are pregnant.
Yeah.
And so the Lord is my shepherd, Psalm 23, you can immerse yourself in that every day of your life. And there's newness and possibilities every day.
Yeah, well, and really, honestly, the Bible has come alive for me. I never really thought of it necessarily as being related to this sort of trying to think about this new epistemology, or not new epistemology, but new to me epistemology. But yeah, and the Bible, and then all kinds of stories kind of come alive as well. And I think that I like that your definition of God is not this crystallized, perfectly known thing. I like that God calls from outside. And I do think that for anybody like listening to this who is attracted to this way of thinking, there is an inherent danger to it in a way, because it does, not a danger. I mean, it feels like a totally worthwhile danger, but it is a danger because you don't know what's, when things come into focus from the deepest reaches, you're not telling them what they must be or what they are, you're looking for what they are through clues. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
Maybe this helps too. We haven't talked about this, but it's in Longing to Know and in Loving to Know too. And that is the role of authoritative guides in knowing. And if you think about, a figure skater and the coach's language that shapes what the figure skater does with their body, that kind of thing, that's an authoritative guide. And the authoritative guides and their maximic language is part of the clues that we rely on to invite the real. Okay. And so I see the Bible as that maximic authoritative language that is actually meant to be subsidiary, not focal. What's supposed to be focal is my love of God. And so I come to subsidiarily indwell the scriptures. I read the Psalms every morning, and they form me in this orientation to the Lord that's a face-to-face sort of a thing, right? And so authoritative guides are not giving absolute information, but they're giving maximic guidance that you can subsidiarily indwell. that then help you to see what is there. So authoritative guides teach us to see what is there, like a radiologist would train somebody to read an x-ray. It's to see what's already there, but we have to be trained by an authoritative guide to see it. And the other thing I would say too is my account of truth is to say that all truth is professional, meaning we profess it. It's credo. So if you were going to ask me, what I think of God, I'd probably recite the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed. But that's something that I profess. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. It's my responsible commitment that somehow is all my responsibility, but it's my submission that I cannot resist. But the credo, just like the Bible, it's in a way, it's again pregnant. I mean, what the creeds are what you don't want to say about God, you know what I'm saying? But it just, when you say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, I mean, you've got enough to chew on there for eternity. I can't get over the maker of heaven and earth business. But it's pregnant with mystery, but it's not, what it isn't is subjectivist. It's pregnant with mystery because it's a richer reality than you can get your head around. Not anything wrong with you. What this is the richness, the three-dimensionality, the inexhaustive depth and possibilities of a world made by God. It's going to be like this. And you get to splash in it. You get to splash in exuberance in this. And it also helps you be irenic or peaceable when you might not feel yourself to be exactly on the same page with your neighbor.
Yeah. It's it's all good stuff, and like there is a submissive element, or a submissive, or a there's an active submission to the real involved in epistemology in the way that you're talking about, and that can explode up into submission to God and to the real. And I think the word God is very loaded, and the word submission is very loaded, but at the same time, when we relax into these things, there is such a great relief. And I feel like submission is something that that is missing, I think.
Here's what submission looks like for me. You want your rose bush to grow? You better find out how to fertilize it, how to water it, and how to clip it, and when to clip it. That's submission to the real. And if you do that, that rose bush will make you a very happy camper.
Yep. And then you get, people, there's a certain amount of beating nature into submission, with things like big monocrop farms and that kind of thing that aren't part of, they're not maybe submitting to the larger ecosystem, and that's a whole other thing. But with this type of knowing, there's always the chance for your knowledge to be redeemed as new information comes forward. And
it's an intrinsically humble approach to live life on the terms of the yet to be known, out of regard for the other.
Yeah, that's great, and that's a really great line probably to end on. I don't want to make you talk to me forever, but I could probably
do it again sometime, though.
That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be really great. I would say the best time would be after I've read your book on the what did you call it again? The metaphysics of childhood.
Well, I'm writing that one now.
Okay, or we could talk about it in advance of it.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, why don't you could read Little Manual for Knowing. I'd love for you to read Loving to Know, but you said what you did about books. But you have read Longing to Know, and that's, kudos to you. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh,
Little Manual would be, you could consider it an entree to Loving to Know.
okay.
So Little Manual could be your next step.
Sure.
And also Little Manual is shareable. So if you wanted to read it with some friends,
Okay.
you know, what Little Manual is a how-to for knowing ventures in any field. And that's either individual or group design teams, sorts of things. It's a freshman orientation book. It's a business seminar book. It's an athletic training book. You know, and so there's scads of questions at the end of each chapter to lead you or your team through your knowing venture. So you might look at that, and that might be you might find that shareable. You get a little bit more of the sense of what I mean by covenant epistemology, which is kind of, it's implicit in longing to know, but it gets developed in loving to know.
Well, I will read it. Yeah, and I wish that they were on that all your books were on audiobooks, because that is how I like reading has come alive in a big way.
Manual is audio.
Little Manual is? Okay.
Read by me.
Okay, that's great to know. Is it on Audible? Yep. Sorry, this is totally okay. I did not realize that. I definitely looked for this one, and I've looked for Polanyi in there too, because I really want. I feel quite sure that it would be tough for me to get through Michael Polanyi, because I've heard about him through you, and I've listened to him do a couple lectures on YouTube, actually, some lectures that are there, and man, it's like, this is so great, but he just is like, you know, I need to listen to it multiple times. So anyway, this is good. Okay, so I will definitely probably download that audiobook right after I'm off here. And yeah, it would be great to talk again sometime. I feel like, you know, I feel a kinship or a friendship with you, even though we've never met. So thank you so much for being on here.
Well, you're so welcome, and greetings to all who have been in this conversation with us too. So thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.